Asyle, Tropical Island Survival, Week 34, Day 1. I got up in the morning and immediately swapped out the superoxide in the kiln for the dried window molds, as time was of the essence for getting them cooked. I also loaded up some sand from the beach into pots for the kitchen kiln and stoked it with wood before continuing my morning chores. When I got back, I started cutting down bamboo to begin constructing the frame for the underwater habitat and stripping the smaller stalks into cords for rope, focusing on the patches further from my base so I wouldn't compromise the hedge too much. Between chopping and keeping the kiln stoked and loaded with limestone sand, I didn't have enough bamboo to begin building the dome's frame until lunchtime. Naturally, I started with the foundation, and while I wanted it to be strong, I also didn't want it to flex, otherwise it would crack the concrete. So as I built the cylindrical frame, I made the radial supports follow a curve along the inside of the cylinder, with additional rope spokes reaching out at angles towards the bottom edge of the cylinder. This should distribute the tensile forces more evenly and minimize flexing, a lot like a suspension bridge. I also made these thicker bamboo stalks hollow so I could run ropes through them for support. Between those tasks and keeping the kiln loaded with limestone sand, that was all I had time to build today. I gave the frame a coating of latex to make sure it was all extra watertight, and to give it just that much more flex room where it would be in contact with the concrete before unloading my window molds and allowing them to cool. While I gave the molds a salt glaze to begin with, I took some extra care at the end of the day to polish them with ash to make sure there would be absolutely no defects in the window surfaces that could make them harder to see through or make them easier to crack. Week 34, Day 2. I got up in the morning and immediately started loading sand back into the kilns, though this time with a twist. I collected the lighter coral sand from the top of the beach for the lime cooking in the kitchen kiln, and the heavier quartz sand from closer to the bottom of the beach, near the water, for the window glass, before getting everything cooking. However, I soon realized a mistake I made in my estimations for how long this would take. Working flat out, I was able to make about 10 batches of glass and lime per day, so it's going to take me 10 more days, but only if I can keep up with the demand for wood, which I don't think I can, about 200 loads. Maybe if I piped hydrogen and oxygen from the electrolysis cell, I could create a little more fuel, or would have to use less if I could make a hot plate. My generator produces around 700 milliamps at a minimum of 12 volts, in order for it to electroplate as fast as it does and charge my batteries, for at least 8.4 watts of power. If that energy is going into making hydrogen and oxygen, they should make a nearly equivalent amount of heat energy when burned. Maybe enough for a Bunsen burner, but not enough for mass manufacturing. I estimate that a load of wood, about 1 cubic foot, has about 164 megajoules of energy in it, based on how much water it can boil, burned over about an hour, so that's about 45 kilowatts of power produced, to which my generator's output is a pittance in comparison, and which is itself a pittance in comparison to the power of my solar kiln. Still, even if I spent all my time between loads cutting down and cutting up trees, I don't think I could do anything more than just stay on top of it. Probably not even that, because the wood would still be green. Not even bamboo can keep up with that kind of demand. It's not like there's going to be any coal or oil seams around here that I could tap into either. Not that I want to. I racked my brains on this problem while I conducted my morning chores, and I briefly considered mining the sulfur that had built up around the edge of the caldera or around the various hydrothermal pockets I'd found scattered around the island. However, it doesn't burn nearly as hot or for as long as wood does, kind of like the end of a matchstick versus the match itself. I eventually concluded, however, that I was going to have to make some kind of compromise, and the best one I could think of was to let the glass cook for longer without wood to help speed up the melting process. It won't be too much of a loss though, because the glass will have to be installed last anyway. So when I got back from my foraging, I pulled the glass from the kiln and put the lime in its place, the idea being that I'll cook the lime first in the solar kiln, which won't require wood, and I can cook the glass windows later, as was the original plan. Again, it'll be a tighter squeeze for time than I was hoping. It'll still cost a lot of wood, but I don't think there's much more I can do. In the meantime, I'll try to collect a little extra wood each day so that when the time comes to make the windows, I'll have what I need. Still, I feel like I've made a costly mistake. In the meantime, without a lot more time before lunch, I made a couple of repairs to my wheelbarrow, which was starting to look a bit worse for wear for all the sand I'd been using it to cart around. The rest of my time before lunch I spent stripping bamboo and twisting it into rope. After lunch, I got back to work on the foundation frame, filling in the gaps in the main support members to distribute the load more evenly, the structure beginning to look like a big basket. As I went, I included some hollows in the cylindrical frame, namely an arched passageway from the outside of the foundation to a cylindrical shaft in the center. That's how I'll get in and out of the dome. Between wheelbarrow runs to keep the kiln loaded, that was all I could make before sealing it all up with latex at the end of the day. Week 34, Day 3. I got up in the morning and started the process again, and it was kind of sinking in now how I'm kind of going to be tied to this wheelbarrow for the rest of the month. On the one hand, this repetitive, monotonous work is just the kind of thing I hate, but at the same time, it doesn't seem as bad as the work I did back home for the post office. I think the reasons for that are, 1, I chose to do this, though the argument could be made that I was forced into both jobs by my circumstances. 2, it'll end, unlike the Sisyphean task of delivering packages every day. 3, signs of progress toward that end are clearly visible. And 4, the end result will make life better than it was, for myself if for no one else. I went a bit long on my morning chores, looking for extra sources of wood, before returning to base and making some more ropes before lunch. Afterwards, before I did anything else with the habitat structure, I made sure that it was still light enough for me to move, and I made sure there were some bamboo rollers underneath it so I can still get it to the ocean when the time comes to move it, even placing some pieces of bamboo perpendicular to and under the rollers to act as rails, so they don't get stuck in the sand. Non-coincidentally, I've also been taking most of my sand for the lime from around this structure, so I'll have a relatively flat path to the ocean that'll fill up a bit with water during low tide to make the thing that little bit lighter from buoyancy. I then decided to get started with the other elements of the structure, namely the internal platforms for the dome, but first I needed to build the elevator system so I could get up there. So I made some block and tackle, and used some of my ropes to build the elevator's mechanisms. It occurred to me while I was making it, though, that instead of using a counterweight, I could use buoyancy to save myself a lot of work. I built the elevator platform out of bamboo, as usual, but made it a bit thick on the bottom, and out of contiguous bamboo segments, which should preserve their buoyancy. The idea is that when I'm standing on the elevator platform, it'll be heavy enough to sink, but when I get off, it'll float again. If I want to go up from the bottom level, I need only apply a little manual force to a rope to elevate myself. If I'm in the middle level and want to go to the top level, I can build a roof onto the elevator cage and use a ratchet to lower the elevator so I can go up to the next level. If I want to keep the elevator at the bottom level when I step out of it, I can hold it in place with a peg or catch, or again, pull it down with a rope if I need to. I could then selectively fill or empty the float with water depending on how complicated I want to make the system. For the time being though, I simply used pulleys and ratchets, building the elevator cage and central support shaft to hold it up and straight. Although I could make it work on land, it was a lot of effort, so I'll mostly be using a ladder to get up and down the structure forward. At the end of the day, I decided to varnish the elevator components for waterproofing instead of using latex, because I'd be walking on the platform in particular, so it needed a harder, more durable coating. Plus, it'll look nice. Week 34, Day 4. I got up, loaded the kiln, and did my morning chores. I spent extra time in the forest this morning collecting bamboo for the next half of the dome, and by the time I believed I had enough, it was time for lunch. Afterwards, I began building the first floor of the dome. Knowing this area was going to be just above the water, I made sure it was a bit elevated from where I expected the top of the foundation to be, and gave the slats some gaps between them and a slight slant towards the center of the structure, in case water floods in and needs a place to run off. Once I'd finished constructing the supporting framework underneath, to save material, I split the rest of the bamboo in half for flooring, with the flat sides down and the rounded sides up, because they'd be a little easier on my feet. As I went, though, I got the idea to split some of the bamboo pieces into wedges that I could fit in between the humps of the floor to make a nice, flat, hardwood surface. It was a little extra work, but I liked the result, and it looked very attractive when I was done varnishing it at the end of the day. Week 34, Day 5. I'm starting to feel pretty sore in the mornings, but there's still so much to be done. I got up, loaded the kiln, and did my morning chores as usual, getting another big load of bamboo and wood from the forest while I was out before lunch. Afterwards, I started working on the support framework for the second level of the dome. And if it hadn't dawned on me before just how big a structure this is, it has now. At the center, of course, the frame was supported by the pillars of the elevator shaft, and at the edge, I made some supports at an angle and on a slight curve which would follow the shape of the dome. In between, I made pillars dividing the lower level into 6 sections, naturally using my signature arches for even load distribution. Next, I began construction of the upper level flooring, using the same basic process as the lower level, though I didn't split the bamboo this time, mostly because I didn't want to have that pattern hanging over my head when I was looking up at it from below. It was also a much smaller area than the lower level, so it didn't take as long to build, even when factoring in the addition of bamboo wedges both above and below to make the paneling attractive to look at. I think it's also worth mentioning that this floor is supported not just by pillars, but by concentric rings of bamboo which are also spoked towards the elevator shaft. My plan for later is to tie some of the other dome framework and cables to this frame for a little extra distribution of tensile force outward from the pressure of the dome's buoyancy, the same principle applying to the perimeter of the lower level. Here, outward forces should cancel out, and some of the upward forces should be distributed straight down into the foundation. At the end of the day, I applied another layer of varnish to the floor and ceiling and went to bed, my shoulder muscles well worn out. It's been a while since I did a big construction project after all. Week 34, Day 6. I'm really looking forward to Sabbath tomorrow, but I have to get through today first. This should be the hardest part of the project, and afterwards everything should get a bit easier. For today, though, I loaded up the kiln and did my morning chores as usual. When I went to collect extra wood and bamboo, though, my axe broke, which I was probably asking for at this point, so I had to stop, grind a replacement head, and make a new handle before I could finish. As such, I didn't collect quite as much bamboo as I was hoping to get today before lunch. With that constraint, and feeling pretty worn out anyway, I decided to go ahead and fill in the walls on the lower level for added strength and decoration. This was an especially good application for some of the thinner lengths of bamboo that I wasn't able to use for structural applications. I liked the idea of filling in the arches with a similar wood paneling to that which I made for the floors so far, and I thought that if I made spokes of wood radiating out from the arches, kind of like the support lines built into the foundation, it would kind of give it an industrial/Art Deco look that I kind of liked, while still being kind of reminiscent of Edwardian wood paneling, which I also liked. It was a nice way to kind of wind down and relax a little before the weekend came, and to start pre-recovering from all the work this week. I decided to make some of the bamboo sections running up the centers of the arches hollow, so I could run electrical cables through them later. I just thought it would look nice to put my light bulbs in the centers of the arches. I didn't have time to varnish them though before the end of the day. Week 34, Day 7. It's Sabbath, and I'm taking a hard break after all the work I've done on the dome this week. No more lime cooking, no more sand. I just did my morning chores and listened to my Bible recordings and sermon on the radio. I didn't go on a dive today, just had an early lunch. Afterwards, I finished varnishing the walls on the dome's lower level and decided to continue working on it, albeit lightly, by adding a few additional artistic and homey touches to it. First of all, it needed some furniture, and that would be easier to install now, before the dome was built. Since I haven't been needing them, I decided to move the furniture I built for the beach hut out and into the dome, namely the bed, the desk, and the shelves. It was nice that I would be able to use them again, but at the same time, it makes the beach hut so much sadder and emptier inside, though also much less of a loss if the smugglers decide to burn it down or something. It was a start, but it occurred to me that I was basically going to have to recreate and miniaturize a good portion of my base in order to make the dome self-sufficient. I would need another calorimeter stove for the kitchen, ideally with another pressure cooker in case I needed to make more potassium superoxide, storage shelves and counters, a fridge if I can swing it, a wash basin, a shower and a way to pressurize the water, a toilet, a workbench, and tools for the diving suit. And that's not even considering the raw materials I'll probably need to conduct any repairs with, like bamboo and rubber, though that may be a good use for the garden, which will need planters. In some ways, this is turning into a lot more work than I'd expected, but it'll give me something to do while stuff is cooking. It also occurred to me that the extra weight, especially from the planters, will help offset the buoyancy of the dome a little, so I'll need to do my best to distribute that weight evenly. However, for the sake of making the dome easy to roll off the island in the first place, Installing all this furniture should probably wait until after the dome is in the water. I'll have to construct a pier or something to make it easier to get to. Again, this is starting to sound like a lot more work than I'd planned. Nevertheless, I decided to use some of the bamboo I had left over from all the construction this week to build some furniture, and to have a little fun with it. I made an ornate chair for the desk, and a couple of lounge chairs for watching the sea life later. It occurred to me, though, that it would be fun to make the lounge chairs extra cushy, like those fancy recliners covered in pleather. But I'll have to wait until I get more latex before I can upholster them properly. Then, just like that, the day was almost at an end, so I varnished the furniture I made before heading to bed, now a little more rested and a little less sore before starting the coming week. Gosh, this was the shortest one yet. Do we even have any bloopers to put in the blooper reel? As time was of the scratch break. I collected the lighter coral sand from the top of the beach for. I eventually conclude. Scratch break. Without a lot more time before lunch. I got up in the morning. Excuse me. I made sure it was a bit elevated from where I expected the top of the foundation to be, and gave the slats have some gaps in them. Okay, stop for edits. I decided to go ahead and fill the walls. Excuse me. I decided to go ahead and fill in the walls. Scratch break. I decided to make some bamboo sections. Wait, where's my spot? It also occurred to me that the extra weight, especially from the planters, will help off. But I made it a. Why so itchy today? Hey there, thanks for listening all the way to the end. Well, that's phase 1 of the dome mostly done. Unfortunately, that was the easy part. The hard and heavy parts are still to come. So, if you want to see how I get on with the next phase of this crazy project, you can press the subscribe and bell buttons to get notified as soon as I've got enough lime ready to start casting the foundation. Now, I'm not trying to get money for views or anything, but it would help me out more than anything else if you could share this video with someone who you think would enjoy it. And since you enjoyed it enough to watch it this long, even if this one's a bit shorter than usual, you can press the like button to say so, and maybe get the algorithm to do a bit of that sharing for you. Also, if you want to share some of your own stories and perspectives on the episode, though I don't expect most of you have ever built a diving bell before, but if you have, hey, that's rad! Feel free to share them in the comments section below. That said, thanks again for listening, and hope to see you here again next week.